The world of magic doesn't end with the turning of a page. Love rises and falls anew, forbidden like poison or blazing like a phoenix's flame. The heroes we thought we knew uncover their hearts once more. So step into the enchantment of emotion and welcome to a world where love is written anew. The night was cool and silver over London, the lamplight glinting against the rain-slick cobblestones outside the Ministry of Magic. Hermione Granger walked briskly through the atrium, her worn satchel swinging against her hip, parchments and quills rustling within. She had grown used to the ministry's echoing halls, the way her heels clicked on the marble floor, the low hum of conversation from witches and wizards working late into the night. But tonight, something felt different. It wasn't just the new project she'd been assigned to, though that too carried its own weight. It was the name attached to it. Malfoy. Hermione clenched her jaw as she entered the lift. The golden gates closed behind her with a soft chime, and the lift began its descent. She told herself she'd outgrown the past, that years of rebuilding the world after the war had made her tolerant, pragmatic, even forgiving. But the thought of working with Draco Malfoy, of all people, made her stomach twist in a way that had nothing to do with nerves. She had seen him only once since the war ended, in the Great Hall during the memorial ceremony. He had stood with his mother at the far end, silent and pale, the eyes of the world burning into his back. Hermione remembered how he'd looked at the marble floor, not daring to meet anyone's gaze. That moment had stirred something unfamiliar in her. Not sympathy, exactly, but a kind of hollow understanding. Still, she had never spoken to him since. The lift doors slid open on level 3, the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. She stepped out, her parchment folder clutched tightly in one hand. "Evening, Hermione," called a familiar voice. Kingsley Shacklebolt was waiting near the conference room door, his tall figure framed by the soft blue glow of the enchanted lamps. His calm, deep voice was as steady as ever, but his expression carried the faintest hint of amusement. "You look as though you're heading into battle," he remarked. "I might be," Hermione muttered before she could stop herself. Kingsley chuckled quietly. "Give him a chance, Miss Granger. You'll find he's not the same boy who used to scowl at you in potions class." She raised an eyebrow. "That's a low bar, Minister." He smiled, stepping aside to let her pass. "Nevertheless, this project is important. If anyone can make it work, it's you two." Hermione took a deep breath and entered the room. It was smaller than she expected, the walls lined with shelves of potion ingredients and glass vials that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. A faint smell of peppermint and metal lingered in the air. And there, standing at the work table, adjusting the flame beneath a cauldron, was Draco Malfoy. He turned as she entered, his pale hair catching the light, his grey eyes wary but calm. "Granger," he said quietly. Not a sneer, just a name, spoken carefully, as though he were testing the sound of it. "Malfoy." She nodded curtly. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick, awkward, almost tangible. The ghosts of their school years seemed to hover in the air, taunts in the corridor, duels in the room of requirement, blood and fear and war. Then Draco looked down, extinguishing the flame with a flick of his wand. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I'm here to work," Hermione replied evenly. He glanced up again, a faint, unreadable expression in his eyes. So am I. They stood on opposite sides of the table, parchments scattered between them. Hermione scanned the project brief. It was a complex undertaking, a joint effort between the Ministry and a private foundation to create potions capable of neutralizing residual dark magic in cursed objects and living beings. Dangerous, intricate work that required precision, patience, and trust. Hermione could manage the first two. The third would take time. Draco adjusted a quill, aligning it perfectly beside the parchment. He still moved with that same meticulous grace she remembered from school, everything deliberate, measured. Yet something about him had changed. His robes were simple, his tone subdued. The arrogance that once dripped from every word seemed replaced by something quieter. Exhaustion, perhaps. She wondered briefly what he saw when he looked at her. The enemy of his youth. The girl who'd fought against everything his family once believed in. Or simply another Ministry official he had to tolerate. The thought unsettled her more than she expected. They spent the next hour in silence, reviewing the research outline. The only sounds were the crackling of the flames and the scratch of quills. It was Draco who finally spoke. "You're still thorough as ever," he said, his voice almost dry. Hermione looked up, startled. "You say that like it's an insult." "It's not," he replied. His gaze lingered on the notes she'd organized. Precise handwriting, color-coded categories, cross-referenced sources. "It's efficient." Hermione blinked. Was that a compliment? From Draco Malfoy? Before she could respond, the door creaked open. A small, fidgeting house elf, no doubt part of the Ministry's new interspecies support initiative, shuffled in carrying a tray of tea. Draco moved quickly, taking it from the elf with a quiet, "Thank you." Hermione froze. He'd thanked it. The elf beamed and bowed before leaving. Draco caught her expression and sighed faintly. "What?" "Nothing," she said, though her voice came out softer than she intended. He gave a wry half-smile. "People change, Granger." She met his eyes for the first time without the weight of the past between them. "So, I see." The clock on the wall chimed midnight. When Hermione finally stepped out into the cold night air, she found herself unsettled in ways she couldn't name. She had expected contempt, arrogance, or at least that trademark smirk. Not quiet civility, not respect. And certainly not this strange, flickering sense of curiosity that tugged at the edges of her thoughts. Perhaps Kingsley was right. People did change. But as she looked back at the faint light glowing through the laboratory window, Hermione Granger had no idea just how much her world was about to change too. The following morning dawned pale and misty, the London fog rolling low across the Ministry's courtyards like silent ghosts. Hermione arrived early, earlier even than she'd planned, partly out of habit, partly out of unease. She told herself it was the workload that had kept her awake half the night, not the memory of the quiet voice that had said, "People change, Granger." The laboratory was still and cool when she stepped inside, the faint scent of herbs and ash lingering in the air. Rows of vials caught the morning light like tiny shards of stained glass. On the table, she found that someone had already been there. 2 cauldrons were simmering gently. Notes had been laid out with a precision almost identical to her own. And beside them, in elegant handwriting she instantly recognized, was a neat label. Infusion Trials, Phase 1. Draco Malfoy was already at work. He was standing by the far bench, coat sleeves rolled up, wand in hand, measuring crushed valerian root with the kind of focus one might expect from a healer, not a former Death Eater. His movements were measured, efficient, deliberate. "You're early," she said as she entered, hanging her cloak by the door. He didn't look up. "So are you." She moved closer, curiosity momentarily overcoming her discomfort. "You've already started the infusion tests?" "I ran the base mixtures overnight," he said, adjusting the flame under one of the cauldrons. "I wanted to see if we could stabilize the counter-agent formula before the Ministry observers arrive this afternoon." Hermione frowned. "You worked through the night?" He gave a faint shrug. "Couldn't sleep." There was something about the way he said it, casual, yet hollow. Hermione felt a pang of understanding, though she didn't speak it aloud. Sleep had never come easily since the war, for either of them. She joined him at the table, scanning his notes. The handwriting was sharp, clean, precise. "Your calculations are sound," she admitted reluctantly. Draco looked at her, one eyebrow raised. High praise from the brightest witch of her age. She gave him a look that was half amusement, half exasperation. "Don't mock me, Malfoy." His mouth quirked faintly. "Wouldn't dream of it." For the next few hours they worked in near silence, the kind of silence that hums with thought rather than tension. It was an odd rhythm they fell into. Hermione dictating instructions, Draco anticipating them without needing to be told. She found it irritating at first, and then strangely comforting. There was a quiet competence about him now, a kind of patience she'd never seen before. But then came the first setback. The potion in the second cauldron began to darken, the color shifting from deep crimson to oily black. The smell that followed was acrid, biting, wrong. "Stop!" Hermione cried, stepping forward. She flicked her wand, but Draco was already moving. With a swift incantation and a sharp sweep of his hand, he sealed the cauldron and conjured a containment barrier around it. The fumes hissed harmlessly against the invisible wall, fading into nothing. For a moment, they both stood there, breathing hard. Hermione glanced at him. That was quick thinking. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Instinct," he said quietly. "Too many years brewing. Things I'd rather forget." The air between them stilled. Hermione hesitated. The words, "I'm sorry," hovered at the edge of her tongue. But she didn't know if that was what he needed to hear. So instead, she said softly, "Then perhaps this project will help you remember better ones." Draco's eyes met hers, sharp, silver grey, uncertain. "Maybe." By afternoon, the Ministry observers arrived, a small group led by Kingsley himself, with 2 junior officials in tow. They reviewed the lab, noted their progress, and praised the early results. When Kingsley finally left them alone again, the tension seemed to melt away. Hermione exhaled deeply, rubbing her temples. That went better than expected. "Shacklebolt seems to think highly of you," Draco remarked, clearing a workspace. "He thinks highly of everyone who does their job properly." "And what about me?" The question caught her off guard. She looked at him sharply, half expecting to see that familiar smirk. But there wasn't one. His tone had been quiet, almost genuine. "I think you're trying," she said carefully. "And that matters." Draco turned away, his voice low. "Trying doesn't erase the past." "No, she agreed. But it's where change begins. The day passed into evening. They continued brewing, refining measurements, comparing notes. As the hours wore on, something began to shift. Not in any dramatic way, but subtly, like the slow thaw of ice beneath the first touch of spring. By the time the clock struck 7, Hermione realized they had been working side by side for almost 12 hours straight, without a single real argument. The thought startled her more than she cared to admit. When she finally gathered her things to leave, Draco lingered by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. His reflection shimmered faintly in the pane, pale, distant, thoughtful. "You know," she said softly, "you're not what I expected." He turned slightly, one eyebrow raised. "And what did you expect?" Hermione thought for a moment. "Arrogance, cruelty, that same sneer you wore through school." A faint, humorless smile tugged at his lips. And instead, someone different, she admitted. Draco's expression softened, just slightly. "I suppose war changes everyone." Hermione nodded. "Yes, it does." Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the lamplight. Hermione stepped out into the cool air, drawing her cloak around her shoulders. She turned once to glance back through the window. Draco was still standing there, silhouetted by the golden light of the lab, his hand resting lightly on the windowsill. He looked out into the world like a man searching for something he'd lost long ago. She didn't know why, but the sight stirred something deep inside her, something she hadn't expected to feel again, least of all toward him. By the time she reached the apparition point, she could still see that faint, glowing image in her mind. Draco Malfoy, alone in the light, looking out at the rain. And for the first time since the war, Hermione Granger wondered if hatred could ever truly stay untouched when faced with the fragile, flickering spark of something else. Something that might one day become forgiveness, or perhaps something even more dangerous. The following week passed in a blur of parchment, potion fumes, and long, quiet evenings beneath the flickering candlelight of the laboratory. Each day began the same. Hermione would arrive early, determined to keep things purely professional, and each day ended with that resolve eroded just a little more. Draco had changed. She'd known it from the moment she saw him again, but knowing and understanding were two different things. The boy who once sneered across the great hall, he did that often, staring out at the skyline as though searching for a horizon he couldn't quite see. "Do you ever stop working?" she asked, setting down her quill. He didn't turn. "Do you?" She smiled faintly despite herself. "Fair point." He glanced over his shoulder then, his expression neutral, though there was a trace of amusement behind his eyes. "You're the only person I've met who can rival my insomnia. I prefer to call it dedication." "Of course you do." They shared a brief, fleeting moment of laughter, the kind that slipped out before either could stop it. It startled them both. For a heartbeat, Hermione saw not the man shaped by war, but the boy who might have been had his life been different. Later that evening, while testing the third batch of the counter-agent, something went wrong. The potion sputtered, hissed, and sent a violent spark of green light across the room. Hermione instinctively raised her wand, but Draco was faster. He threw a protective charm that flared bright silver, deflecting the burst. The shield shimmered between them for a moment, then faded, leaving the air thick with smoke and the faint tang of burnt nettles. Hermione coughed, waving the fumes away. That was close. Draco was still staring at the spot where the spell had struck. You overcharged the flux root infusion. I did not, she shot back. Your measurements were off by half a dram. He turned to her, eyes narrowing slightly. Granger, I've been brewing since I was 10. And I've been correcting sloppy brewing since I was 12, she retorted. For the first time in days, they argued. Not the quiet, measured disagreements of colleagues, but the sharp, quick exchange of two minds too stubborn to yield. It was infuriating, and yet there was a strange kind of exhilaration to it, a reminder of how alive she felt when challenged. Eventually, after several tense minutes, Draco sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Fine, let's test it again. Your way. Hermione blinked, taken aback by the sudden concession. My way. He nodded. Prove me wrong. Her eyes met his, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. Challenge, respect, curiosity. They brewed again, side by side, more careful this time. The second attempt held steady. The mixture glowed a steady blue, cooling to a smooth silver sheen. Hermione leaned closer, excitement flickering in her eyes. It's working, she whispered. Draco's lips twitched into the smallest of smiles. So, it seems. When the potion finally settled, they stood in silence, both watching the gentle swirl within the cauldron. Hermione felt the familiar thrill of discovery, that deep sense of rightness that came from solving a puzzle only she and another mind could understand. But this time, it wasn't just the potion that left her breathless. Perhaps, Draco said quietly, you're not so insufferable after all. Hermione let out a soft laugh. And perhaps you're not as hopeless as I thought. He gave a mock bow. High praise indeed. The tension broke. They spent the next hour reviewing notes, and by the time Hermione realized how late it had grown, the night outside had deepened into misty darkness. The ministry corridors were nearly empty when she gathered her things. Draco walked her to the lift, an unnecessary courtesy, but he did it anyway. At the door, he hesitated. You shouldn't walk alone this late, he said. Hermione raised an eyebrow. Since when do you care about my safety? His tone was light, but his eyes weren't. Since people started noticing this project. Not everyone approves of helping people like me. She studied him for a long moment. The shadows beneath his eyes were deeper than before, the faint tension in his shoulders betraying a weariness he couldn't hide. I can handle myself, she said, her voice firm but gentle. I know, he replied softly. That's what worries me. The lift doors opened, cutting through the quiet. Hermione stepped inside, her heart unexpectedly heavy. As the doors slid shut, she caught one last glimpse of him, standing alone in the corridor, hands in his pockets, the light from the torches gilding the edges of his pale hair. That night, she dreamed of a silver shield of light, of green sparks, and a voice calling her name through the smoke. She woke before dawn, breathless, the echo of that shield still bright behind her eyes. The following day, an official memo appeared on her desk. It was short, written in Kingsley's steady hand. Security alert. Unauthorized access attempts detected in your project laboratory. Remain cautious. Details to follow. Hermione felt her pulse quicken. She hurried down the corridor, parchment still in hand, and burst into the lab, only to find Draco already there, examining the door's locking spells. "You saw it too?" he asked without looking up. "Yes. Do you know who?" "No, but whoever it was knew what they were doing." He gestured to the faint traces of magic around the handle, almost invisible, but shimmering faintly if one knew how to look. "Someone tried to get in last night." Hermione's stomach twisted. "But why? Our research isn't even finished." Draco's gaze met hers. "Because if it works, it changes everything. Cursed wounds, objects, even people. All reversible. Not everyone wants that." She hesitated. "You think it's a sabotage attempt?" He didn't answer right away. "I think it's a warning." For the first time, Hermione noticed the faint tremor in his hand as he dispelled the traces of the intrusion charm. Whatever ghosts haunted him, they were stirring again. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "We'll protect the work. Together." Draco looked up, meeting her gaze with something almost fierce. "You trust me?" Hermione hesitated, not because she doubted him, but because the truth frightened her. "Yes," she said finally. "I do." The words hung between them, fragile and real. Outside, thunder rumbled over London. The first drops of rain struck the windows, blurring the city into silver streaks. And as lightning flashed across the sky, Hermione realized that whatever they were stepping into, the research, the danger, the strange growing connection, it was far too late to turn back. For in that dimly lit room, with cauldrons simmering and storms gathering beyond the glass, an old enmity had begun to unravel. And something new, unpredictable, and perilous was taking its place. The storm that had gathered over London the night before had not yet broken. Thunder rolled faintly beyond the ministry's walls, and a sharp wind swept through the narrow streets of Diagon Alley. Inside the laboratory, however, the air was still, thick with the earthy scent of dried herbs and the faint metallic tang of potion steam. Hermione stood at the far table, wand poised over a delicate phial, watching as drops of pale blue liquid fell into a small cauldron. Each drop hissed, releasing tiny sparks that vanished as quickly as they appeared. She was trying to focus, to keep her thoughts on the formula before her, but her mind kept drifting back to the night before, to the warning Kingsley had sent, and to Draco's quiet words. Someone tried to get in. He was late that morning, which was unusual. Draco Malfoy was many things, but careless was not one of them. She had come to expect his punctuality, his neatness, the steady rhythm of their shared work. His absence left the room feeling strangely empty. When the door finally opened, Hermione looked up quickly, only to stop short. Draco entered, rain-soaked and pale, a thin trickle of blood marking his temple. "Merlin, what happened?" she exclaimed, rushing forward. He brushed her concern aside with a tight shake of his head. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," she countered. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." He conjured a handkerchief and dabbed at the cut. "Someone followed me this morning." Hermione froze. "Followed you?" He nodded once, expression grim. "Two figures in the alley. They vanished before I could get a good look, but one of them fired a curse, missed by an inch." Her pulse quickened. "You think it's connected to the break-in?" "I don't think," he said quietly. "I know." For a moment they stood in silence, the faint bubbling of the cauldrons the only sound between them. Hermione's mind raced through possibilities. Death Eater remnants, smugglers, anti-reform factions, anyone who might resent the idea of former dark wizards finding redemption through this project. "We need to tell Kingsley," she said. Draco's jaw tightened. "No. The moment we do, they'll shut this down. Call it a security risk. This research won't survive another bureaucratic review." Hermione stared at him. "You'd rather risk your life?" He looked at her then, and the steadiness in his gaze startled her. "I've already risked it for worse causes." The air around them seemed to hum with quiet intensity. Hermione wanted to argue, to insist on procedure and safety, but part of her understood. This project wasn't just an assignment for him, it was atonement. She exhaled slowly. "Then we increase security ourselves. No one gets near this lab again." He inclined his head. "Agreed." The day unfolded under the low growl of the storm. They reinforced the wards, layering spell upon spell, until even the walls shimmered faintly with protective energy. Hermione found herself watching Draco as he worked. The precision of his movements, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the quiet focus that had replaced his old arrogance. At one point, their hands brushed as they adjusted a rune circle. She felt the faintest spark, not magical, but something else, fleeting and disorienting. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Draco looked away sharply, muttering something about recalibrating the binding sigil. By evening, the last of the wards were set. Hermione slumped into a chair, exhausted but relieved. "That should hold," she said. Draco nodded, setting down his wand. "For now." Outside, lightning flashed. For the first time that day, she noticed the tremor still running through his hands. He caught her gaze and gave a humorless smile. "Old habits. I used to hide it better." Hermione's voice softened. "Fear isn't weakness, Malfoy. It's just memory." He looked at her then, truly looked, and something unreadable flickered behind his eyes. "You always have an answer, don't you?" "Only when someone needs one," she replied quietly. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to echo their silence. When they finally left the ministry, the night air was sharp and wet. Hermione drew her cloak tighter as they stepped into the narrow street that led toward the main apparition point. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but thunder still grumbled somewhere far above. "Where do you live now?" she asked as they walked. Draco hesitated before answering. "Wiltshire, though the manor's different now." "I can imagine," Hermione said softly. He glanced sideways at her. "No, I don't think you can." There was no bitterness in his tone, only weariness. "The manor's empty most days. My mother stays with friends in France. I keep to one wing. The silence doesn't bother me anymore." Hermione wanted to say something, a comfort, a kindness, but she knew nothing she said could erase what that place meant. Instead, she asked, "Then why stay?" Draco shrugged. "It's where the ghosts are." They reached the corner where their paths would part. Hermione turned toward him, unsure what to say. He looked different in the rain, less composed, more human somehow. His hair clung to his forehead, his grey eyes dulled by exhaustion. "Be careful," she said finally. His lips curved faintly. "You too, Granger." She watched him disapparate, the sound sharp against the night. When she vanished moments later, The street was empty once more. That night, Hermione couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, pale in the rain, the faint cut at his temple, the stubborn light that hadn't yet gone out. By morning, she'd made up her mind. She arrived early again, but not to brew. This time she brought files, ministry records, reports of suspicious magical disturbances, anything that might explain the intrusion. When Draco arrived, she handed him the stack without a word. He arched an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Evidence," she said. "We're going to find out who's behind this." He regarded her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're relentless." "I prefer determined." His mouth twitched. Semantics. They spent the day poring over records, tracing patterns of dark magic through the city. Slowly, a picture began to form. Fragments of a group operating out of Nocturne Alley, remnants of the old ideology, those who refused to accept the end of the war. By evening, Draco leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "So, they're targeting us to stop the potion from working." Hermione nodded grimly. "If this potion can reverse the damage of dark curses, it threatens their entire belief system. They want the wounds of the past to stay unhealed." A faint smirk ghosted across his lips. Poetic, in a vile sort of way. She gave him a sharp look. "This isn't funny." "I didn't say it was." He hesitated. "But it does mean something, doesn't it? If people are this desperate to stop it, maybe what we're doing matters more than we thought." Hermione stared at him, really stared, and for the first time she saw not a boy trying to outrun his past, but a man facing it. "Yes," she said quietly, "it matters." Outside, the storm finally broke, rain pounding against the windows in fierce rhythm. Inside, the two of them stood together, shoulder to shoulder, as the sound of thunder filled the night. And though neither would admit it, they both felt it. That strange, quiet pull growing between them, like the first threads of a spell not yet spoken. Whatever lay ahead, they knew only this. They would face it together. And for the first time, neither of them felt quite so alone. The storm lasted 3 days. The rain fell ceaselessly, cloaking London in mist, the cobblestones shining like black glass beneath the lamplight. Inside the ministry, the corridors were dim, the hum of magic heavy in the air. Hermione felt it in her bones. The city seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to break. By the 4th morning, the sun finally pierced through the clouds. When Hermione arrived at the laboratory, the golden light streamed through the windows, falling across shelves and cauldrons in quiet brilliance. She had grown accustomed to this place, the steady bubbling of potions, the scratch of quills, the hum of wards that now shimmered faintly over the walls. It had become their world, small and private, removed from everything beyond its doors. Draco was already there, as she expected. He was bent over a pile of parchment, his wand hovering over a vial that gleamed faintly with silver light. His concentration was absolute, his movements careful, elegant. He didn't look up when she entered, but she saw the faintest twitch of acknowledgement at the corner of his mouth. "You're early," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "So are you," she replied. "Habit. Or insomnia." He glanced at her then, the corner of his mouth curving faintly. "Perhaps both." Hermione smiled despite herself and joined him at the table. Their work had shifted over the past days, no longer just brewing, but investigating. They were determined to discover who had tried to breach the laboratory, and why. Kingsley's latest report had offered little, only that the intruder's magic was old, intricate, and possibly linked to a network of sympathizers once loyal to Voldemort's cause. Draco had said nothing when he'd read it, but she had seen the way his hand tightened around the parchment. Now, as they worked, the silence between them felt different, no longer strained, but filled with the quiet rhythm of familiarity. After several hours, Draco set his wand down and rubbed his temples. If the traces match what I think they do, this isn't just random sabotage, he said. They're using binding runes, ancient ones. You'd need access to restricted archives to replicate them. Hermione frowned. Which means someone inside the Ministry. He met her gaze. Exactly. The realization hung between them like a shadow. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Hermione said softly, "We'll have to be careful who we trust." Draco nodded. "You don't say." His tone was light, but his eyes betrayed unease. She could see the ghosts flickering there, the old suspicion, the weight of a lifetime spent doubting others and being doubted in return. "Draco," she said suddenly, surprising herself by using his first name. "You know this isn't your fault, don't you?" He looked at her sharply, as though the words had cut deeper than intended. "If not mine, then whose? These are people who once followed my family, people who—" He stopped, his voice tightening. "It doesn't matter." "It does," Hermione insisted. "Because you're not them. You're not your father." He gave a soft, bitter laugh. "You sound certain." "I am." Draco studied her for a long moment, then looked away. "You shouldn't be." The conversation ended there, but the air between them remained charged, fragile as spun glass. That evening, Hermione stayed late, poring over a new set of records. Draco had gone to fetch supplies from the potions department, leaving her alone in the lab. The quiet felt strange without him, too still, too vast. She had grown used to his presence, the way his footsteps echoed softly across the floor, the way he hummed under his breath when deep in thought. She was halfway through translating a fragment of a rune text when she felt it, a pulse of magic, faint but sharp, rippling through the air. The wards shivered, light flickering along the edges of the walls. Hermione froze. Someone was trying to break through. She grabbed her wand and sprang to her feet, just as the outer door trembled, its enchantment sparking under the pressure of an unknown spell. The sound grew louder, a dull, rhythmic pounding that echoed through the laboratory. "Protego! Maxima!" she shouted, casting the shield across the doorway. The air shimmered, holding firm, but the magic behind the assault was strong, too strong for her to face alone. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the pressure stopped. Hermione stood motionless, her wand raised, heart pounding. The silence that followed was deafening. Slowly, she edged toward the door. The wards glowed faintly, but there was no sign of an intruder, no footsteps, no voices. Then a shadow moved outside the frosted glass. She drew a sharp breath, but before she could react, the door opened and Draco burst in, wand raised. "Granger, are you?" "I'm fine," she said quickly, lowering her wand. "Someone tried to get in again. They nearly breached the wards." His jaw tightened. "Did you see who it was?" "No, only movement." Draco cursed under his breath and began inspecting the door, tracing the faint burns where the spell had struck. His expression darkened. "They're getting bolder." Hermione nodded grimly. "And closer." When he looked up, His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw fear there, not for himself, but for her. "We can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "It's only a matter of time before they try again. Next time, they might not miss." Hermione swallowed hard. "We're not giving up, Draco." He hesitated, then sighed. "I know." His voice softened. "You never do." Their eyes held, and something shifted, subtle but undeniable. The air seemed thicker, charged with a tension neither dared to name. For a heartbeat, Hermione forgot the danger, the war, the walls around them. There was only the man standing before her, tired, scarred, but trying, always trying. She looked away first. "We should strengthen the wards again." He nodded, though his gaze lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. By the time they finished, the night had deepened into silence. The torches burned low, casting long shadows across the room. As Hermione packed her notes, Draco crossed to the window, staring out into the dark. "Do you ever wonder," he said softly, "if peace is just an illusion? Something we tell ourselves so we can keep pretending the war is over?" Hermione hesitated. "Sometimes." "And yet you still believe in it?" She smiled faintly. "Someone has to." He turned to her then, his expression unreadable. "Maybe that's why we're still alive." Outside, the wind howled softly against the glass. Inside, the faint hum of magic settled once more into quiet. When Hermione left that night, she found herself pausing in the doorway, looking back one last time. Draco stood at the window still, his reflection framed by the moonlight. For reasons she couldn't explain, she whispered, "Good night, Draco." He didn't turn, but his voice followed her as she closed the door. "Good night, Hermione." And as she walked down the empty corridor, her heart beat faster. Not from fear, but from something far more dangerous, far more unexpected. Because she realized, with a certainty that startled her, that hatred was no longer what bound them. Something else had taken root, something she could no longer ignore. The next morning dawned cold and still, the kind of winter morning that crept through even the thickest cloak. Hermione awoke before sunrise, her thoughts already racing ahead to the day. Sleep had become a fleeting thing lately. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind conjured flashes of light, the shimmer of wards collapsing, Draco's voice shouting her name through smoke. When she finally arrived at the ministry, the corridors were quiet, dust motes drifting through the slanted light of the enchanted chandeliers. The world felt poised on the edge of something, like a spell half cast, waiting for its final word. Draco was there before her, as always. He looked tired, more so than usual, a shadow of restlessness in his eyes. There was a tension to his movements that told her he'd slept little, if at all. "Morning," Hermione greeted, her voice softer than she intended. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. "You look exhausted." "So do you." His mouth twitched faintly. "Then we match." Hermione tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. She moved toward the table, setting down a fresh stack of parchment. "I've cross-referenced the rune sequences from the intrusion spells. There's a pattern. See here?" She pointed at a narrow column of runic symbols. "These markings are identical to the ones used in the old Durmstrang codices. Whoever's behind this has studied ancient northern magic." Draco's gaze sharpened. "That narrows it down. There aren't many who dare mix that with modern curse work." "Exactly," I think we're dealing with someone trained, not just a stray sympathizer. He frowned, his hand brushing the parchment. A professional. Hermione nodded grimly. And that makes them far more dangerous. For a long moment, they simply stood there, side by side, the light from the cauldron flickering over their faces. Hermione could hear the faint rhythm of his breathing, steady and controlled. The nearness unsettled her, though she refused to let it show. They began working in tandem, their movements almost instinctive now. When she adjusted the flame, he stirred the mixture. When he transcribed results, she recorded observations. It was strange, this rhythm of quiet cooperation between two people who, not long ago, would have gladly hexed each other in a corridor. Yet beneath the steady hum of work, something deeper stirred. It wasn't spoken of, but it lingered in the air, the growing awareness between them, fragile and dangerous. By late afternoon, the potion had reached its critical phase. The mixture shimmered like molten silver, light pulsing from its surface in time with the beating of their hearts. Hermione leaned closer, eyes shining with concentration. "Now," she whispered, "add the asphodel essence, slowly." Draco complied, his movements precise. For a heartbeat, the potion went still. Then it shifted, glowing brighter, the air around them charged with magic. The light reflected in Draco's eyes, and Hermione found herself unable to look away. "It's stabilizing," he murmured. "Merlin's beard, Granger. I think we've done it." Hermione exhaled in disbelief. "It's holding." They stood side by side, watching as the liquid settled into a perfect, luminous calm. For weeks, they'd failed again and again, potions that had curdled, burned, or collapsed into useless sludge. But now, at last, the spellwork held firm. Hermione smiled, not the polite, restrained sort she wore at meetings, but something genuine, bright with relief. "We did it." Draco's answering smile was small, but real. "Looks like we make a decent team after all." "You're not terrible," she said lightly. "High praise from you." Their laughter echoed softly through the room. It faded only when Hermione noticed how close they were standing, so close that the space between them seemed to hum. She took a small step back, heat rising in her cheeks. "Right," she said briskly. "We should document the process before the sample loses stability." Draco's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he turned back to his notes. "Of course." For the next hour they worked in silence, though the air between them felt heavier than before. Hermione tried to focus on her quill, but her thoughts betrayed her. Every time she glanced up, she caught glimpses of him, the curve of his hand as he wrote, the faint furrow between his brows, the quiet intensity in his expression. She told herself it was nothing, that this strange awareness was only the byproduct of shared work and too many sleepless nights. But deep down, she knew better. As evening approached, Kingsley arrived unannounced. His broad figure filled the doorway, his expression calm but serious. "Good work, both of you," he said, scanning the glowing potion. "The ministerial committee's been following your progress closely. They'll want to see the results soon." Hermione inclined her head. "We'll have it ready within the week." "See that you do," Kingsley said, then turned his gaze to Draco. "And, Mr. Malfoy, keep your guard up. Intelligence reports suggest increased activity in Nocturne Alley. Whoever's behind these attacks hasn't given up." Draco's jaw tightened. Understood. When the minister left, silence settled once more. The last of the daylight faded beyond the windows, leaving only the soft glow of candles. Hermione watched Draco quietly as he began cleaning up the workstation, his movements efficient, unthinking. "You should go home," she said finally. "Get some rest." He looked at her with a wry smile. "You're one to talk." "Fair," she admitted. "But I mean it. You look—" She hesitated, then finished softly. "Tired." He set down a vial, the faintest shadow crossing his expression. "I don't sleep well in that house." Hermione tilted her head. "Malfoy Manor." He nodded. "It's quiet. Too quiet. Every room feels haunted." She hesitated. "Do you ever think about leaving?" "Every day," he said simply. Then, with a small shrug, "But leaving doesn't change what it was." Something in his voice caught at her heart, the raw honesty of it, unguarded and human. "Maybe," she said gently. "Staying is your way of facing it." He looked at her then, and for a fleeting moment, the distance between them disappeared. There was understanding there, the kind that could only exist between two people who had both seen too much and survived anyway. When Hermione finally left that night, the air outside was sharp and cold. The street lamps flickered like distant stars, and the faint smell of rain lingered in the air. She pulled her cloak tighter, her mind still replaying their conversation. She told herself it was only concern, that she was simply worried for a colleague in danger. But the truth pulsed beneath her thoughts, impossible to ignore. Something had changed. Hatred no longer defined them, nor mere tolerance, nor even reluctant friendship. Something deeper had begun to bloom, fragile, dangerous, and impossible to control. As Hermione disapparated into the night, the last thought that crossed her mind was of grey eyes and quiet words, and a voice that haunted her even in silence. And somewhere, in a vast, empty manor lit only by moonlight, Draco Malfoy stood before a cold hearth and whispered into the dark. "What are you doing to me, Granger?" The flames flared, casting his shadow long across the stone floor, and in that light it was hard to tell whether he looked cursed or saved. The first frost arrived that night, laying a thin shimmer of silver across the roofs of London. The world had grown quieter, the chill in the air sharp enough to bite at exposed skin. Hermione wrapped her cloak tightly around her shoulders as she crossed the courtyard of the ministry, her breath clouding before her. It was early, too early for most, but lately she found herself drawn to the lab as though pulled by invisible threads. The room greeted her like an old companion, familiar and waiting. Shelves lined with ingredients caught the dim morning light, glass vials glinting faintly. A few candles flickered weakly, still burning from the night before. She frowned. Draco had stayed late again. On the table, she found fresh parchment covered in his meticulous handwriting, notes written well past midnight. The final lines read, "First stabilization complete. Counter-agent tests to begin tomorrow. Need to confirm Granger's calculations before full infusion." She traced the ink with her fingertips, her lips curving slightly. He'd left no signature, but he didn't need to. The precise order of thought, the almost obsessive attention to detail, it was all him. Hermione turned as the door creaked open behind her. Draco stepped in, looking paler than usual, the collar of his coat turned up against the cold. His hair was damp with frost, and there was a weariness around his eyes that even the morning light could not hide. "You're here early," he said, his voice low. "So are you." "I never left," he admitted. Hermione blinked. "You stayed all night?" He shrugged lightly. "The potion was unstable. I didn't trust it not to explode." "That's reckless, even for you," she said, moving toward the cauldron to inspect it. Draco smirked faintly. "You sound like my mother." "Your mother has more sense than you, apparently." For a heartbeat, his expression softened, just the smallest flicker of warmth at the mention of his mother. But then it was gone, replaced by his usual cool composure. "The potion held," he said, changing the subject. "But we'll need to adjust the dilution ratio before testing." They set to work. The rhythm between them came easily now, wordless, efficient. They moved in perfect synchrony, as though their wands were guided by the same current of thought. Hermione realized, not for the first time, how much he'd changed. Gone was the sneering boy who'd thrived on cruelty and pride. The man standing beside her was quiet, patient, deliberate, haunted perhaps, but not broken. Hours slipped by unnoticed. When Hermione finally straightened from the cauldron, her shoulders ached and the light filtering through the high windows had turned golden. She wiped a smear of soot from her cheek and glanced at Draco. "You've improved," she said lightly. "You're brewing, I mean." Draco raised an eyebrow. "Improved?" "I remember a time when you couldn't brew a simple invigoration draft without scolding half the classroom." He gave a dry laugh. "Yes, well, I had a professor who delighted in marking me down for breathing incorrectly." "Professor Snape marked everyone down for breathing incorrectly," Hermione said with a small smile. Draco chuckled softly. "True." It was strange, this ease between them, like walking through a forest where the shadows no longer frightened her. She hadn't meant for it to happen, but somewhere between the hours and the shared danger, the walls she'd built had begun to crack. As evening drew near, the potion reached its testing phase. The air in the room shimmered faintly, charged with anticipation. Hermione placed the cursed stone, a relic from a recent aura raid, into the containment circle. The runes glowed blue, pulsing gently. "Ready?" she asked. Draco nodded, his wand poised. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. Their wands moved in perfect unison, threads of silver and gold light weaving together, pouring into the cauldron. The potion shimmered, then surged upward in a whirl of colour. For a moment, Hermione thought it would burst, but then the light steadied, spilling into a serene glow. The cursed stone trembled. A hiss filled the air. Then, before their eyes, the dark runes carved into its surface began to fade, dissolving like mist in sunlight. Hermione gasped. "It's working." Draco's grip on his wand tightened. "Keep the flow steady." For nearly a minute, they held the spell. Then, with a final flicker, the light dimmed, and the stone lay still, its magic gone. Hermione lowered her wand, her heart racing. "We did it!" Draco stared at the now purified stone, a faint disbelief in his eyes. "We actually did it." She laughed, pure, unguarded laughter that filled the room like warmth after a long winter. "I knew it would work." Draco's gaze found hers. "You always do." The words were simple, but they carried something more, something quiet and dangerous that made her breath catch. She looked away quickly, pretending to busy herself with her notes. "We'll need to repeat the test to confirm stability." "Of course," he said softly. The silence that followed was thick, filled with everything they weren't saying. Hermione felt his eyes linger on her, and it made her pulse quicken in ways she didn't want to think about. When she finally dared to glance up, he was still watching her, his expression unreadable. "What?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He hesitated, then said, "Nothing. You just look different when you're proud of yourself." She blinked, taken aback. "Is that your idea of a compliment?" He gave a half smile. "Perhaps." Hermione shook her head, but the corners of her mouth betrayed her. "You're insufferable. So you've told me." The moment broke when a loud crack of thunder shook the windows. The storm had returned, fierce and sudden. The lights flickered. Draco moved quickly, reinforcing the wards with a wave of his wand. "Another one," he muttered. "They always come during storms." Hermione's stomach clenched. "You think they'll try again tonight?" His eyes darkened. "I'd bet my life on it." That night, they stayed. Neither spoke of leaving, though both knew why. The lab had become their fortress, and together they strengthened every spell, every charm, until the air itself thrummed with protective magic. By the time the storm's roar reached its peak, the two of them stood side by side at the window, the lightning flashing across their faces. "Strange, isn't it?" Draco said quietly. "How the past never truly dies. It just waits for the right moment to strike again." Hermione turned toward him. "Then we'll strike back." Their eyes met, silver and brown, two storms colliding in the half-light. And for a heartbeat, the air seemed to still, the thunder fading into silence. When the next flash came, Draco was still watching her, and Hermione realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Because somehow, against all odds, she trusted him. And that, she thought, might be the most dangerous magic of all. The storm raged on through the night, but the ministry's walls held firm, the wards glowing faintly with every crash of thunder. Inside the laboratory, the light of the cauldrons flickered like hearthfire, casting long shadows that danced over the shelves. Hermione sat at the main work table, quill in hand, her hair unbound and wild from the long hours. Across from her, Draco paced, his steps measured and restless. Neither spoke for a long while. The potion lay cooling between them, still glimmering faintly in its glass phial, proof of what they had achieved together. Yet there was little joy in the air. Success, it seemed, had come with a cost, one they couldn't yet see, but both could feel. Hermione broke the silence first. "You should sit down before you wear a hole in the floor." Draco stopped pacing, but didn't sit. "I can't. The wards are reacting strangely." She frowned, glancing toward the door. "You reinforced them yourself. They should hold." "They should," he said darkly. "But something's off. I can feel it." Hermione set her quill aside and rose. "You've been awake for 2 nights. You're imagining things." "Am I?" He lifted his wand and murmured a detection charm. The air shimmered faintly, threads of green light weaving through the room. Hermione's breath caught. The wards were pulsing irregularly, as though strained from some unseen pressure. Draco's jaw tightened. "They're trying again." "Now?" He nodded once. "Now." Before Hermione could respond, the sound came. A faint crack like distant thunder, but sharper, closer. The walls vibrated with a tremor of dark energy. Books toppled from a shelf, parchment fluttering like frightened birds. "Stay behind me," Draco ordered, his wand raised. "I can protect myself," Hermione shot back, already casting her own shield. A flare of red light burst through the far wall, an explosion spell meant to breach the outer layer of their protections. Draco countered it instantly, his own spell meeting it mid-air in a blinding flash. Sparks rained down, sizzling against the floor. Hermione moved beside him, her voice steady even as her heart raced. "They're strong. So are we." For several tense minutes, the air filled with the echo of clashing spells. The laboratory glowed with the pulse of ward light, bending and reforming under the assault. The intruders never showed themselves, only their magic, invisible and venomous, testing every barrier they'd built. Finally, with one last wave of silver light, Draco slammed the door shut with a sealing charm so powerful the stone itself shuddered. The silence that followed was deafening. Hermione's breath came in short bursts. She turned to him, her wand still glowing. "They'll be back." Draco's face was pale in the candlelight, his hair damp with sweat. "I know. Then we need to finish the counter-agent. Tonight." He looked at her sharply. "It's too soon." "We don't have a choice," she said. "If the potion works, it could disarm any lingering dark curse. It's the one thing that might protect us." He hesitated, and for the first time Hermione saw fear, not for himself, but for her. "You realize how dangerous this is?" She stepped closer, her chin lifting. "I've faced worse." Something flickered in his eyes then. Admiration, perhaps, or something far more complicated. "You always have." They returned to the table, working quickly, their wands moving in near-perfect rhythm. The potion hissed as they poured in the final ingredients, its light deepening from silver to gold. Hermione whispered the incantation, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. As the last words left her lips, the air thickened. Magic surged around them, heavy and electric. The potion flared once, then dimmed to a soft, steady glow. Hermione exhaled. "It's done." Draco stared at the cauldron, disbelief in his voice. "You did it." "No," she corrected quietly. "We did." He looked at her then, truly looked, and the tension between them shifted again, like the world itself had drawn closer. There was pride in his gaze, yes, but also something softer, something that had no place in a room built on war and science. Hermione felt it too. Her heart beat unevenly, every sense attuned to the space between them. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words never came, because at that moment the wards cracked. A sharp, splintering sound tore through the air, followed by a rush of cold wind. The lights flickered, then went out entirely. The laboratory plunged into darkness. Draco reacted instantly, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind him as a bolt of green light shattered through the door. "Down!" he hissed. They dove for cover as another curse exploded against the wall. Stone shards flew through the air. Hermione raised a barrier with a flick of her wand, shielding them both. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Voices echoed from the corridor, low, rough, familiar in a way that chilled her blood. Draco froze. Hermione heard the name they spoke and saw the color drain from his face. "Who are they?" she whispered. He met her gaze, his voice barely audible. "People I thought were dead." Hermione's breath caught. "Old followers?" "Worse," he said. "Those who swore they'd finish what my father couldn't." The realization hit her like ice. "They want you." "No," Draco said, his expression hardening. "They want us." The attack came fast, spells flashing through the smoke and dust. Hermione fought back with precision, each movement sharp and practiced. Draco moved beside her, his own magic fierce and controlled. Together, they held the line, defending the lab that had become both their battleground and their refuge. When the last of the intruder's curses faded, only silence remained. Smoke curled through the air, the scent of burning parchment heavy around them. Hermione lowered her wand slowly, her arms trembling. "They're gone," she said, breathless. "For now." Draco leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling rapidly. A thin cut ran along his cheek, glinting with blood. Hermione moved toward him before she could think, reaching out. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he muttered. "Let me see." He didn't protest as she reached up, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Her fingers lingered longer than they should have, tracing the line of the cut with gentle precision. When she looked up, she found his eyes fixed on hers. For a moment, the rest of the world fell away. The storm, the danger, the lingering fear, all of it dissolved in the quiet between them. Hermione's voice was barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this? Risking everything?" He swallowed hard. "Because I owe it. To you, to myself, to what's left of decency in this world." Their eyes met, and the unspoken truth between them deepened. No longer denial, no longer the fragile beginning of something new, but a certainty they could no longer avoid. Then, almost without realizing it, Hermione took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, steady and warm despite the cold. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant now, fading. The worst of the storm had passed. Inside, beneath the flickering light of the rekindled candles, two souls scarred by war found something the darkness had never allowed them before: hope. And though neither spoke it aloud, both understood. This was only the beginning. For love born from hatred was never gentle. It was fire forged from ruin. And like all powerful magic, it demanded everything in return. The morning after the attack came with an uneasy calm. The sun rose pale and uncertain over the rooftops, its light filtering through the soot-streaked windows of the laboratory. The place bore the scars of the night before. Shattered glass glittered on the floor, scorch marks lined the stone walls, and the faint smell of smoke lingered like a warning. Yet the wards held, humming quietly with the remnants of protective magic. Hermione stood amid the wreckage, her wand in hand, examining the damage. Every scorch mark told a story, every broken flask a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. She was tired. Her limbs ached and her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but there was no time to rest. Draco entered quietly, his robes dusted with ash, his hair unkempt. He had spent most of the night at the edge of the ministry's perimeter, ensuring that no other breaches occurred. When he looked at her, something in his expression softened. "You're still here," he said. "Of course I am." "You should have gone home, rested." Hermione glanced up at him, her voice steady but firm. "I'm not leaving this unfinished. Whoever they are, they won't stop until we make this work." Draco's jaw tightened, and he crossed to the nearest table, picking up one of the broken vials. "You sound exactly like you did at school, stubborn to the point of madness. And you sound like someone who's finally learning to listen," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. He gave a quiet huff of amusement, setting the vial down. "Perhaps I've had a good influence." Hermione's eyes met his briefly. "Perhaps." They worked in silence for a while, restoring the damaged equipment, repairing cracks in the walls. Hermione found herself glancing at him more often than she cared to admit. There was something about the way he moved now, calm, deliberate, unhurried, that made it difficult to reconcile him with the boy she had once loathed. When they had cleared enough space to work again, she unrolled the parchment containing the potion's formula. "We need to replicate it," she said. "If we can produce a stable batch, we can finally test it properly." Draco leaned over the parchment, his sleeve brushing her arm. The faint contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. She stepped aside quickly, pretending to study her notes. He didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he did, and chose not to mention it. "If we're doing this," he said, "we'll need fresh hellebore. The stores here are ruined." "I'll go," Hermione offered. He looked up sharply. "You're not walking through Diagon Alley alone, not after last night." She folded her arms. "And you think you're going to stop me?" His mouth quirked slightly. "No, but I'm coming with you." The argument ended there. The market in Diagon Alley was quieter than usual. Winter had driven most vendors indoors, leaving the cobbled streets half empty. A thin mist hung in the air, softening the outlines of buildings. Hermione and Draco moved through the crowd in silence, the tension between them unspoken but palpable. As they passed Flourish and Blots, Hermione caught sight of their reflections in the shop window. A pair of figures walking side by side, so different, yet oddly in step. For a moment, it struck her how strange this had all become. There had been a time when she could not bear to be near him, and now she trusted him with her life. They reached the apothecary at the far end of the alley. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and dust. Shelves lined with jars and ingredients stretched to the ceiling. The shopkeeper, an elderly wizard with round spectacles, greeted them with a cautious nod. "Miss Granger," he said politely. "Mr. Malfoy." Draco's name lingered in the air, heavy with old memory. Hermione saw the flicker of unease cross the man's face before he hid it behind a smile. "We need fresh hellebore," Hermione said quickly, her tone professional. 3 ounces and a sprig of silver leaf. The man nodded and shuffled away to prepare the order. When they were alone, Draco said quietly, "You see it too." She turned to him. "See what?" "The way they look at me, like I'm a ghost that refuses to stay dead." Hermione hesitated, her heart twisting. People remember the past, but they're wrong if they think it defines you. Draco's expression was unreadable. Maybe, but some ghosts never stop haunting the living. Before she could respond, the shopkeeper returned with a small wrapped parcel. Draco paid for it before she could protest. When they stepped outside again, the sky had begun to darken, clouds gathering low over the rooftops. They walked in silence for a time, their footsteps echoing against the wet cobblestones. Then Draco spoke, his voice low. "You really believe I can be something different, don't you?" Hermione stopped walking. "I don't just believe it," she said. "I've seen it." He looked at her, and for the first time there was no sarcasm, no guarded distance, only something raw, almost vulnerable. "You're the first person who ever has." The air between them thickened, heavy with words unspoken. Hermione's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to look away. "Come on," she said quietly. "We should get back before the storm starts again." By the time they returned to the ministry, the sky was awash of grey. Rain began to fall, steady and cold. The laboratory glowed softly with candlelight, its restored wards pulsing like a heartbeat. Draco set the parcel on the table and unwrapped it carefully. If we add this to the base mixture, it should strengthen the potion's resilience. Hermione nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Let's do it. They worked in silence, the sounds of the storm muffled beyond the walls. When the hellebore touched the surface of the potion, it shimmered faintly, a soft golden light blooming within. Draco leaned closer, his breath brushing her hair as he whispered, "It's stabilizing." Hermione felt her pulse quicken. "We did it again." He smiled faintly. "No, you did." She turned to protest, but the words died on her tongue. His face was closer than she expected. Too close. The candlelight caught the silver in his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Neither moved. The storm raged outside, wind howling through the corridors, but inside, everything was still. It was Hermione who broke the silence, her voice barely audible. "Draco!" He blinked as though waking from a spell. "Yes?" "Don't," she faltered, unsure of what she meant to say. "Don't what?" "Don't cross this fragile line between them. Don't make her feel what she already did." But before she could finish, he stepped back, the distance between them restored. "We should record the results," he said quickly, his tone brisk once more. Hermione nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her quill. They worked late into the night, avoiding each other's eyes. But as she watched him from the corner of her vision, his calm focus, the quiet strength in his movements, Hermione knew the truth she could no longer deny. Whatever had begun between them was no longer a fragile thread of tolerance. It was something fierce and alive, born from danger and fire, and it terrified her as much as it drew her in. And though neither spoke of it, both understood what was coming. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that now stirred within their hearts. Winter settled over England like a spell, quiet, sharp, and unrelenting. The days at the ministry grew shorter, the nights colder. Candles flickered late into the hours of dawn as Hermione and Draco worked tirelessly, perfecting their potion, strengthening the protective wards that now encased the laboratory like armor. Yet even as they built security around themselves, something inside those walls had begun to shift, fragile and unspoken. The attack had changed everything. Though the ministry had increased patrols and posted auras nearby, Hermione and Draco both knew that the danger was far from over. There was a calm, yes, but it was the kind that came before a storm. Not peace, only the pause between battles. Hermione found herself studying Draco when she thought he wasn't looking. He carried himself differently now, not with arrogance, but with quiet purpose. The cold detachment that once defined him had melted away, replaced by something she couldn't name. When he laughed, which happened rarely, it was softer, uncertain, as though he had forgotten how and was only just learning again. And yet, for all their growing closeness, there remained a line neither dared cross. Perhaps it was fear, or perhaps the fragile recognition that whatever tied them together was as dangerous as the magic they brewed. One evening, while the snow fell thick outside and the rest of the ministry had long gone home, Hermione lingered over her notes. The laboratory was warm with firelight, shadows moving softly across the walls. Draco was across the room, adjusting a rune circle that glowed faintly blue. His sleeves were rolled up, his forearms marked with faint ink lines from old potion formulas. You never stop, he said suddenly, glancing at her over his shoulder. Hermione looked up from her parchment. Neither do you. That's different, he said. I've got too much to make up for. You mean to atone, she said quietly. Draco paused. Is there a difference? Hermione met his eyes. Yes, one is about guilt. The other is about change. He said nothing for a long moment, only looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he nodded, turning back to his work. Then I suppose I'm still learning the difference. They fell into silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the soft hum of the wards. Hermione returned to her writing, but her quill hovered uselessly over the page. She was thinking of him, of his quiet intensity, of the way his hands moved when he brewed, of how he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. Granger, he said suddenly, breaking her thoughts. When this is over, when the potion's complete, what will you do? She blinked. You mean after? He nodded. You've spent years rebuilding this world. Doesn't it ever exhaust you? Hermione smiled faintly. Of course it does. But if we don't keep trying, what was the point of everything we fought for? Draco studied her for a long while, then said softly, You really believe there's still something worth saving? I have to. Then maybe that's the difference between us, he murmured. You still have faith. Before she could respond, the lights flickered. The air in the room shifted, cold, heavy, alive with energy. Both of them went still. Wards, Hermione whispered. Draco's wand was already in his hand. Intact, but something's moving near them. A pulse of magic rippled through the air. The flames in the hearth dimmed to embers, and the faint glow of the wards shimmered as though under strain. Hermione's heart began to pound. They're testing us again, she said. Not just testing, Draco replied. His tone had changed, low, sharp. They're here. Before she could react, a deafening crack split the air. The outer ward flared blindingly bright, then shattered like glass. The force of it sent Hermione stumbling backward. Draco caught her just in time, pulling her close as the shockwave rolled through the room. When the smoke cleared, the door was gone, blown open by dark magic. Figures cloaked in black filled the doorway, their faces hidden beneath masks. The leader stepped forward, his voice cold and familiar. Draco Malfoy, he drawled. You've fallen far. Draco's grip on his wand tightened. You should have stayed buried, Selwyn. Hermione's blood ran cold. Selwyn, the Death Eater who'd vanished after the Battle of Hogwarts. You disgrace your father's name, Selwyn sneered. Working with mudbloods, building potions to undo the Dark Lord's legacy. How noble. Hermione's wand was already raised. Leave now, or you'll regret it. The masked men laughed. The minister's favorite little war hero, Selwyn said mockingly. Always the savior. Draco stepped forward, placing himself between her and the intruders. If you want to settle something, Selwyn, you settle it with me. Gladly. The air exploded with magic. Curses flashed in every color, green, red, silver. Hermione countered each one with fierce precision, her spells cracking through the air like thunder. Draco moved beside her, his magic sharp and controlled, their spells weaving together in perfect synchronization. The battle was chaos. Flashes of light, the crash of shattering glass, the roar of flame. One of the masked men lunged toward Hermione. She disarmed him with a single flick, sending him crashing into the wall. But Selwyn was powerful, his curses ancient and ruthless. He fired a blast of green fire toward Draco. Hermione shouted his name and leapt forward, casting a shield charm just in time. The spell struck her barrier and burst into smoke, the force of it knocking her off balance. Draco caught her as she stumbled. "You all right?" She nodded breathlessly. "Don't let him break the circle." Draco raised his wand, fury flashing in his eyes. The runes on the floor flared to life, gold light cutting through the smoke. With a roar of power, he unleashed a spell that split the air, a torrent of white fire that sent Selwyn crashing backward. The remaining intruders hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes. "Go," Draco commanded, his voice cold as steel. "Tell whoever sent you that the past died with the war." Selwyn spat blood, his voice hoarse. "This isn't over, Malfoy." Draco's spell flared again, and the intruders vanished into the darkness, leaving only the echo of their departure. Silence fell. The only sound was their breathing, their hearts pounding in rhythm with the flicker of dying flames. Hermione leaned against the table, her wand still raised. "That was too close," Draco finished. He turned to her, his expression tight with concern. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No. You?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "Only my pride." For a moment, neither spoke. The room was a ruin, broken wards, scorched stone, smoke curling in the air, but they were alive, together. Hermione reached out, her hand brushing his sleeve. "You saved my life." Draco looked down at her hand, then at her face. His voice was low, unsteady. "You saved mine first." Their eyes met, and the world seemed to still around them. The noise of the storm, the distant crackle of magic, all of it faded until there was only the two of them, standing in the dim light of what they had fought to protect. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Hermione stepped closer. Draco didn't move, but his breath caught as her hand came to rest against his chest. "Don't thank me," she whispered. "We're in this together." For once, he didn't argue, and when the storm outside broke again, its thunder rolling through the night, it seemed almost an echo of something deeper, a promise forged in danger and sealed in silence. Because between them now burned a fire neither of them could deny, a fire that, if left unchecked, would consume everything they were and everything they thought they knew about love. The night after the attack passed in restless silence. The ministry had been sealed off for security. Auras patrolled the corridors, their voices echoing faintly through the stone halls. Most employees had been sent home, but Hermione and Draco remained in the laboratory, refusing to abandon their work. The wreckage from the battle lay around them, burnt parchment, shattered glass, blackened stone. Yet amid the destruction, the potion still glowed faintly on the table, its golden light pulsing like a heartbeat. Neither had spoken for hours. Hermione sat near the fire, her arms wrapped around her knees, watching the light flicker over the floor. Draco stood at the far end of the room, staring out the window into the endless snow. He hadn't said a word since their auras left, though she had caught him tracing his wand absently against his arm. An old habit, perhaps, a silent way of anchoring himself. Finally, Hermione broke the quiet. "You knew Selwyn." Draco didn't turn. Everyone in that world knew him. "He said he'd finish what your father started." Draco's shoulders stiffened, but his voice remained calm. "My father believed in purity. Selwyn believes in vengeance. They're not the same thing, though both lead to ruin." Hermione rose and crossed the room slowly. "You don't have to do this alone." He gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "I've always done it alone. Not anymore." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment the mask of composure slipped. There was exhaustion in his eyes, and something else. Fear, not of death or danger, but of trust. Hermione reached out, resting a hand lightly on his arm. "You're not your father, Draco." He flinched at the name, but didn't pull away. "No, I'm worse. My father died still believing in something. I've spent my life trying to believe in nothing, because it hurts less." "Maybe," she said softly, "you've just been believing in the wrong things." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Draco's voice dropped to a whisper. "And what should I believe in now?" Hermione's heart stuttered. "In the possibility of change, in what we're building, in yourself." His eyes flickered to hers, grey and storm-bright, and for an instant the air between them hummed with something that had nothing to do with magic. But before she could say another word, a sharp knock broke the moment. The door creaked open, and a tall figure stepped inside. Kingsley Shacklebolt. "Granger, Malfoy," he said gravely, his eyes sweeping the room. "I've just come from the Aura Division. We've confirmed Selwyn's group was operating out of Nocturne Alley. They've vanished, but they won't stay hidden long." Draco straightened. "They'll come again." "Yes," Kingsley said. "And next time, they may not aim only for you. They know what this potion can do." He paused, his expression softening as he turned to Hermione. "You've both done remarkable work, but it's time to move the project. We can't risk another breach." Hermione frowned. "Where?" "Hogwarts," Kingsley said simply. "The castle's wards are ancient, stronger than anything the Ministry can muster right now. You'll have protection there." For a long moment, Hermione didn't speak. Hogwarts, the very heart of their shared past, a place haunted by both memory and loss. To return there now, with Draco of all people, felt like fate's cruel twist. But Kingsley was right. It was their only option. 2 days later, they arrived beneath the shadow of the castle. The snow lay thick on the ground, and the towers rose dark and majestic against the pale winter sky. For Hermione, stepping through the great oak doors felt like walking into a dream. Familiar and strange all at once. The scent of stone and parchment lingered in the air, mingled with the faint hum of enchantments that had guarded these halls for centuries. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall, her expression a mixture of welcome and weariness. "Granger, Mr. Malfoy," she said briskly. "The headmaster's tower is at your disposal. The wards have been adjusted to accommodate your experiment." "Thank you, Professor," Hermione said, trying not to sound as nervous as she felt. McGonagall's eyes softened slightly as she regarded them both. "I trust this work is worth the risk." Hermione nodded. "More than worth it." The headmistress inclined her head. "Then I suggest you waste no time." They set up their laboratory in one of the upper chambers, a room with high windows overlooking the lake, its surface frozen solid beneath the snow. The castle seemed to watch them, ancient and silent, as though weighing their presence. For the first time in weeks, Hermione felt something like peace. Hogwarts was safe. It had always been safe, at least for her. But when she glanced at Draco, standing stiffly by the window, she saw the weight of memory settle over him like frost. "It feels strange," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Coming back here." Hermione approached quietly. "It's not the same place it was." He gave a faint, bitter smile. "No, but ghosts don't care about time, do they?" She wanted to ask which ghosts he meant, his father's or his own, but she didn't. Instead, she set her hand gently on his arm. "Then maybe it's time to face them." He turned to her, and something flickered in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. "You really think redemption can be found in these walls?" "I think redemption finds those who earn it," she said softly. He studied her for a long moment before replying, "Then perhaps you're my only hope, Granger." Hermione felt her breath catch, but she said nothing. The days passed quietly after that. They worked from dawn until long after dusk, refining their potion, strengthening the wards, tracing ancient runes into the stone. At night, the castle would fall silent, save for the distant howl of the wind across the lake. Sometimes Hermione would wake in her narrow bed to hear footsteps pacing the corridor outside. Draco, unable to sleep, haunted by old memories. One night, she found him in the great hall. The moonlight spilled through the high windows, painting the floor in silver. He stood at the center of the room, staring up at the enchanted ceiling, which still mirrored the winter sky. "I used to hate this place," he said quietly when she approached. "It made me feel small, powerless." Hermione stopped beside him. "And now? Now it reminds me of everything I destroyed." She turned to face him. "You didn't destroy it. You survived it. That matters." He looked at her then, and there was a raw honesty in his voice when he whispered, "You make it sound so simple." "It isn't," she said, "but nothing worth mending ever is." Their eyes held in the moonlight. The air between them seemed to pulse, fragile and charged, and for one breathless moment, Hermione thought he might reach for her. But he didn't. He only said, "You should rest. Tomorrow will be long." She nodded, though her heart felt impossibly heavy as she turned away. As she left, Draco stood alone in the moonlit hall, the ghosts of his past whispering in the silence. He had spent his life running from what he was, but now, standing where so much had begun and ended, he felt the faintest spark of something new, something like hope, or perhaps something more dangerous. And though he could not yet name it, he knew it had a face, and a name, and a will strong enough to change his world. Hermione Granger, the girl he'd once despised, the woman he could no longer forget. Snow blanketed the grounds of Hogwarts in perfect stillness. The castle, ageless and grand, stood against the white horizon like a memory carved in stone. Inside, torches burned low, their flames reflected in the vast windows of the headmaster's tower, where Hermione and Draco worked tirelessly beneath the hum of ancient magic. Weeks had passed since they'd arrived, and though the world beyond the castle walls continued to churn in uncertainty, here time seemed to bend. Each day bled into the next, quiet, tireless, strange. The rhythm of their work had become second nature. Long mornings filled with potions and theory, afternoons spent testing and recalibrating runes, and nights in which the silence of the castle pressed against their hearts. But something else had taken root between them, fragile yet undeniable. It was there in the way their hands brushed when they passed each other tools, in the way their voices softened when they spoke late at night, in the shared glances that lingered a second too long. Neither dared name it, but both felt it, like the first tremor of magic before a spell is cast. One evening, as twilight deepened into indigo, Hermione sat at the long oak table, her quill moving furiously over parchment. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and smoke. Across from her, Draco leaned over the cauldron, carefully stirring the potion that glowed with shifting hues of silver and blue. "You're overthinking it again," he said, without looking up. Hermione frowned, not lifting her quill. "I'm verifying the dilution ratios. If we're wrong by even a fraction—" He interrupted gently. "You're never wrong by a fraction." She looked up, startled. His tone hadn't been mocking. It was calm, almost fond. For a heartbeat, she forgot what she was writing. "Flattery, Malfoy. That's new," she said finally. He smirked faintly. "I've learned it's easier than arguing with you." Wise choice. They shared a brief smile, small, fleeting, but real. It faded as quickly as it came when a sudden noise echoed down the corridor. Both froze. Hermione's wand was in her hand before the second sound came. "What was that?" Draco straightened, his own wand drawn, eyes sharp. "Not the wards. That came from the stairs." The noise came again, a low creak, followed by the unmistakable scrape of footsteps. Hermione's pulse quickened. The castle's wards should have alerted them to any intrusion, but the silence beyond the door told her something was wrong. Draco gestured for her to stay back. He moved to the door, muttering a spell under his breath. The heavy oak shimmered faintly, revealing a heat signature on the other side. One figure, still and waiting. "Whoever it is," he whispered. "They're cloaked." "Not a student," Hermione murmured. "No one else knows we're here." Draco's grip on his wand tightened. "Then it's them." Before Hermione could respond, the door burst open. A gust of cold air swept through the room, scattering parchment across the floor. The intruder stepped inside, tall, hooded, the glint of a wand visible beneath dark robes. Draco reacted instantly. "Expelliarmus!" The spell shot across the room, but the figure deflected it with a swift twist of the wrist. "Malfoy," the stranger said, voice low and cutting. "Still playing at redemption?" Hermione's stomach dropped. She knew that voice. "Selwyn." The hood fell back, revealing sharp features twisted in a cruel smile. His eyes gleamed with malice. "You thought you could hide in this castle forever?" Draco moved in front of Hermione, his stance defensive. "You're making a mistake." "No, boy," Selwyn sneered. "You did, when you chose to stand with her." The name spat from his lips like poison. Hermione felt her anger rise, hot and fierce. "Leave," she said coldly, "before you regret it." Selwyn laughed. "Regret? The Dark Lord may be gone, but his legacy lives on. You think a few potions will cleanse this world? Foolish girl." Draco's wand hand trembled slightly. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "Oh, but I do," Selwyn said, stepping closer. "You've built something powerful. I can feel it. A potion to undo curses, to erase sin. What irony, Malfoy. The boy born in darkness now trying to wash it away." Draco's voice was low. "You're not taking it. Then you'll die with it." The duel began in a blur of light. Spells collided mid-air, filling the chamber with sound and fire. Draco and Hermione fought as one, their movements perfectly synchronized. Her shields met his strikes, her curses followed his precision. Selwyn was strong, fueled by something wild and desperate, but they were stronger together. Hermione's spell struck first, shattering the floor beneath his feet. Draco seized the moment, sending a jet of silver light that slammed into Selwyn's chest. He stumbled backward, hitting the table where the potion stood. The glass vial wobbled, teetered, then fell. "No!" Hermione cried, lunging forward. The vial shattered. Golden liquid spilled across the stone floor, hissing where it touched the runes carved into the circle. Light burst outward, blinding and fierce. The force threw all three of them apart. When the light faded, Selwyn was gone. The potion too was gone, its power absorbed into the floor, into the castle itself. Only silence remained. Draco lay on the ground, blood trickling from a cut along his temple. Hermione scrambled to his side, her hands shaking. "Draco! Draco! Look at me!" He opened his eyes slowly, blinking up at her. "Still here," he murmured weakly. Relief flooded through her so strongly she couldn't speak. She pressed her wand to his wound, muttering a healing charm. The skin closed beneath her touch, leaving only a faint scar. He watched her in silence, his breath unsteady. "You always save me," he said softly. Hermione swallowed hard. Someone has to. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to still. Outside, snow fell softly against the windows, the night calm once more. Inside, beneath the fading glow of magic, something shifted irrevocably. Hermione realized then that it wasn't hatred that had bound them, nor even redemption. It was something far older, far more dangerous, an understanding born of fire and survival, of loss and defiance. Draco reached up, his hand trembling slightly, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You should have run," he whispered. "I'm not running from you," she said. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. The distance that had once seemed insurmountable was gone, replaced by a fragile, undeniable truth. Hermione felt the world tilt as he leaned closer, hesitant, uncertain. The space between them vanished, and in that breathless moment, she forgot the war, the danger, the past. There was only this impossible, beautiful thing, born in the ashes of everything they had survived. Then Draco drew back, his voice low and rough. "If we stay here, they'll come again." Hermione blinked, dazed. "Then we finish what we started, together." He looked at her for a long time before nodding. Together. Outside, dawn began to break over the snow, casting pale gold across the frozen lake. In the light of a new day, two shadows stood side by side within the tower. One dark, one bright, bound by something neither of them fully understood. And though the danger was far from over, Hermione knew one truth beyond all doubt. Whatever awaited them next, they would face it. Not as enemies, not as strangers, but as something far stronger. Something that had begun with hatred, but would end, at last, with love. The winter sun rose over Hogwarts, pale and uncertain, casting long shadows across the snow-draped grounds. The castle stood still, its towers reaching into the crisp blue sky, as if guarding the secrets that had unfolded within its walls. From the highest chamber of the headmaster's tower, a faint light glimmered, soft, golden, alive. Hermione awoke to silence. For a long moment, she didn't know where she was, her mind caught between dream and memory. Then it all came rushing back. The battle, the shattering of the vial, the light that had swallowed the room whole. She sat up sharply, her heart pounding. The laboratory was quiet now, calm. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the scorched floor where the potion had spilled. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of ash and magic. Across the room, Draco sat slumped against the wall, his eyes half closed, his face pale but peaceful. His robes were torn, and there was a smear of dried blood along his jaw, but he was breathing. Hermione exhaled in relief and moved to his side, her knees brushing against the cold stone. "Draco," she whispered, touching his shoulder. "Wake up." He stirred, blinking against the light. When his gaze finally found hers, something like disbelief flickered in his eyes. "We're still alive?" "It seems so." He gave a faint, crooked smile. "That's a first." Hermione almost laughed, though her voice trembled. "Don't make jokes. You scared me." "I seem to do that often," he murmured. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "The potion's gone. All of it." "I know." His voice was quiet, steady. "But it worked." She turned to him sharply. "What do you mean?" Draco pushed himself upright, wincing slightly. The energy didn't vanish. It bonded. The runes absorbed it. "I can feel it." He touched the floor where the golden stains still shimmered faintly beneath the sunlight. "The castle took it. It's alive with it now." Hermione frowned, trying to make sense of it. "You're saying the potion has merged with Hogwarts itself?" He nodded slowly. "Every brick, every ward, every piece of ancient magic here. It's been strengthened. The dark magic that lingers in this place is gone." Hermione's breath caught. "Then we did it." Draco looked at her, a strange light in his eyes. "We did." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the faint hum of the castle, the whisper of enchantments old as time, now pulsing with renewed life. Outside, the snow glowed beneath the morning sun, untouched and pure. Finally, Hermione spoke. "The Ministry will want to know." Draco gave a quiet laugh. "Let them. For once, they can fight over something that isn't me." Hermione smiled faintly, but it faded as she studied his face, the shadows beneath his eyes, the lines of exhaustion. "You look terrible," she said softly. He smirked. "And yet, you're still here." She rolled her eyes, though her chest ached. "I don't know why." "Yes, you do," he said quietly. The words lingered in the air, soft but heavy with meaning. Hermione met his gaze, and for the first time she didn't look away. The barriers they had both built, of anger, pride, guilt, fell away in that moment. "Draco," she whispered. He reached out, hesitant, his fingers brushing hers. "You shouldn't say my name like that," he murmured. "Why not?" "Because it makes me want to forget everything else." Hermione felt her pulse quicken. The world around them seemed to fade until there was nothing left but his voice, his eyes, and the warmth of his hand against hers. For years, she had believed that love was something simple, something bright. But this was different. It was born of scars and silence, of battles fought and forgiven. It was messy and human and real. When he leaned closer, she didn't stop him. Their foreheads touched, a quiet meeting of souls rather than a desperate collision. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. Hermione smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but you've earned it." He laughed softly, the sound fragile but genuine. "Only you could make redemption sound like a lecture." "Old habits," she said, and this time they both laughed. Later that day, Kingsley arrived with a team of aurors to inspect the aftermath. He listened carefully as Hermione explained what had happened. The attack, the shattering of the vial, the merging of the potion with the castle's wards. When she finished, Kingsley stood in silence, his gaze sweeping over the glowing runes, that still pulsed faintly in the floor. "Incredible," he murmured. "You've created something no one else could, a living defense. The castle will protect itself now." Hermione nodded. "It wasn't just me." Kingsley's eyes softened as they fell on Draco. "No, I suppose not." Draco inclined his head, wary but polite. "I'm not looking for recognition." "Good," Kingsley said, "because you won't get much of it. But you've done something remarkable, both of you. Hogwarts will stand safer than ever because of your work." When the auras departed, the castle returned to quiet. Hermione and Draco stood together at the window, watching the last of the ministry carriages disappear beyond the gates. The air was crisp, the lake frozen solid beneath the sun. "So, what now?" Draco asked quietly. Hermione took a long breath. "Now we rest, and then maybe we start again." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Together?" She hesitated only a moment. "If you want to." He smiled, a slow, uncertain smile that reached his eyes. "I think I do." They walked through the corridors in silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing against stone polished by centuries of memory. When they reached the entrance hall, Hermione stopped. The great doors stood open, sunlight spilling across the floor. "This place has seen too much darkness," she said softly. "It's time it remembered the light." Draco looked at her, his voice low. "And you're the one who brought it back." She shook her head. "No, we did." Outside, the snow sparkled, untouched and endless. Hermione stepped forward, her boots sinking into the soft white powder. Draco followed, the two of them side by side, leaving twin trails of footprints behind. For the first time, there was no tension, no lingering resentment, only the quiet understanding that they had crossed something far greater than the line between friendship and enmity. When they reached the edge of the lake, Hermione paused, gazing across the frozen surface. "Do you remember," she said, "what you told me once? That peace was an illusion?" Draco's lips curved faintly. "I was wrong." "Yes," she said, smiling. "You were." He laughed softly, and she turned toward him, her eyes bright against the winter air. The silence stretched between them, gentle, endless, alive. And when he finally reached for her hand, she didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined, warm despite the cold, steady despite the wind. Behind them, the castle shimmered faintly with golden light, its ancient walls alive with the pulse of renewed magic. The snow fell softly, erasing their footprints as they walked on together. The world was quiet. The war was over, and from the ashes of hatred, something pure had been born, a love neither of them had expected, yet both had been waiting for all along. Theirs was not a fairy tale, nor a perfect ending, but something far better, a beginning. And somewhere deep within the castle, where light met shadow, Hogwarts itself seemed to sigh, a long, peaceful sound, as if even its stones understood what had just begun.